Hello, everybody, and welcome back to week 5 of the USFL show. I'm going to be your host, Sean PSU Fans 2 Newsham. Joining me, as always, is Alex Fearmyturtle Hardin. Alex, how's it going today?
Doing pretty well. Excited to get into another glorious week of USFL football.
Yeah, unlike USFL, we are not drastically going to change our product today and completely adjust it to what the fans want, aka what they don't want. But we'll talk about that a little bit and how it has impacted things and how the games played out on the weekend as well as we get going. So, Alex, you have a little bit of a recap on week 4 and what you saw. And then also, how about you break down a little bit of the changing of the rules that occurred and how that impacted everything in general?
Yeah, so last week was kind of interesting. One of the big storylines was just not knowing if Jamar Smith was going to start or not. And then Alex Magoo ends up starting and playing the entire game. So it's an interesting situation where he was probably, I don't know, around like 40% and a lot of, especially smaller field cash game type stuff. So it's just really trying to avoid mistakes. There was one beat writer. She was at the game and posted an image of Alex Magoo on the big screen with like 10 minutes before the game kicked off. We put that into Discord saying, don't feel great about Jamar. And he ended up not starting or playing. So, yeah, definitely have to kind of follow along and do some detective work and try to just read the tea leaves a bit. But
yeah, and you probably owe her a edible arrangement at this point, right, Alex? And then also, this goes for everyone that's playing USFL that doesn't maybe play like college football or other things. The way to generally deal with college football and USFL is maybe even worse than that. If there is uncertainty around a situation, avoid the player. It just will cause you a lot less headaches. So Jamar Smith last week is a good example. Alex said that Jamar was about 40% in cash and nobody played him. So talk about that a little bit, Alex, and like how people should approach a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points we've been saying on like last week, I know we talked about just trying to eliminate mistakes. So kind of the thought process going into the game is, like he's going to be popular. He's the highest projected quarterback, but how great do we feel about him actually starting and playing? Because Magoo was the day one starter. Like Magoo has not been benched at all. He has been hurt. He was a full participant back at practice. He might just be their guy whenever he's healthy. And no matter how well Jamar Smith plays, he's the backup on this team. So we just don't know. So it comes down to it. You have the option to swap to Sloter, who is locked in starter. So to me, that made sense given the risk, and you just really don't want it. You can't take a 0, especially at quarterback. But outside of that situation, some interesting things. Jordan Ellis had a huge rushing game for New Orleans. Jonathan Adams had a big game for New Orleans, and kind of what Sean was alluding to earlier with the rule changes, they moved to a running clock in the first and third quarters. So there was incomplete passes. The clock is moving. That resulted in around 8 or so fewer offensive snaps per team on average. So moving that league average from like low 60s into the mid 50s. And then just for some context, last week, New Orleans ran like 71 plays. They were kind of running from behind. They got off a lot of plays. So you'll see some big numbers from them in terms of yards. It was kind of an outlier in terms of the number of plays they got off. So just seeing the totals this week, they're in the mid 30s. We've adjusted our rates a bit around the league just to make sure we're accounting for the reduction in plays overall across the league.
Yeah. So now, do you think that fans as a whole want that? Because I personally don't like that. I have never liked when they limit plays and limit the amount of stuff going on in the game. I think this league as a whole has just a misconception of what people actually want and who their target audience is. And that has caused a lot of issues all around. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want a poor replication of the NFL, which is what they're trying to do. These teams are acting like they're trying to act like their NFL teams, approach it that way. We want to see fun and innovation. We want to see passing. We want to see big plays. And then half these teams just want to pound the ball between the tackles all game long and just get out of it as unscathed as possible. I think maybe part of the reason the coaches are taking that approach is that the roster sizes are so small. that they're just trying to get through these games as quick as possible. I don't know. It just doesn't make much sense. You would think they'd want to open it up, have some fun. Like these coaches are they're just trying to create like a poor imitation of the actual NFL product. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to dig into it. We'll do our rundown position by position and talk through things a little bit here. So first thing, we're going to start off with the quarterbacks. We did see Case Cookus have a full game of usage last week, and we saw him really go out there and throw the ball as you'd expect. He threw the ball 30 times, did have some rushing ability as well, put up a really strong game. Deandre Johnson had a really heavy workload in comparison to previous weeks and ran the ball really inefficiently, but it was there. So he had 11 carries despite not really being productive. And then Shea Patterson, he was absolutely dreadful last weekend in the air, but he made up for it on the ground where he had 79 yards and a touchdown. And we also saw Josh Love get moved to, I believe, Pittsburgh as well. Or no, he got moved off of Pittsburgh. So what was your thoughts at quarterback in general? And then what's your thoughts with, we've sort of seen a little bit more of an evening out here where some of the teams are losing their sort of cohabitation at quarterback, and they're sort of moving to one guy or the other, with Shea Patterson getting every snap last week.
Yeah, so we typically start off the quarterback position of just like going through our exercise of eliminating the pool, really. And there's still a lot of that. So Deandre Johnson, he was up to 70% of the snaps, but it's still only accounted for half their dropbacks. So Perez is still getting a lot of the work, the pass work, which kind of definitely limits Deandre Johnson's upside. However, as Sean talked about, like he's getting the rush attempts, like he's getting like between 25 and 30% of their rush attempts typically, which definitely keeps them in play. Perez is out for me. Pittsburgh, Kyle Lauletta played the whole game with Josh Love moving off the team. However, they did sign Vad Lee of Georgia Tech, and I believe James Madison. So it could be a situation where Lauletta's doesn't really have a stranglehold on the job, and we could see Lee get a chance next week. So I'm a little scared off him. Patterson, he was pretty egregious. And since they brought in Josh Love, I'm kind of expecting Patterson not to get a full game this week, but he does have some upside in terms of just running around, making some high-risk throws. I don't know. He's not good, but if he plays the whole game, he's certainly in play. I just don't think that's going to happen this week. Continue to see Clayton Thorson just be absolutely terrible. So not a lot of interest there, although they are a solid favorite on the slate. The Magoo thing's interesting because he's fine if he's going to play the whole game, but like if Jamar Smith just missed last week because he was sick or didn't get a lot of practice reps and it flips this week, like there's a lot of uncertainty there still. So that really just kind of leaves that top three, the clear tier one for me, which is Slaughter, Cookus, and Tamu. I think Cookus is the safest in terms of just like a floor. And then when you account for his price tag, he's about $2 or $3K less than these other guys. Like Cookus will probably be the de facto cash game quarterback just because it allows you to do a bit more with your roster. However, Slaughter's not far behind, and Tamu is definitely more of the GPP option of the three. He's running a bit more. It has flashed a bit of upside, but I do prefer Slaughter and Cookus, especially for cash games. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think for me, I would be going Cookus and cash. We've talked about it week in, week out. Philly's going to throw the ball, so he's the one guy that's going to be involved in the offense no matter what, which goes a long way in providing some safety. So I think I would definitely be looking at Cookus in cash, especially when you're getting the salary reduction. To be fair, I think if he was 10 or 10.5, I would still be saying play Cookus. So the fact that you get him at 8 is really good. I think for me, it's really like I would be looking at 5 quarterbacks. The top 3 you mentioned was Slaughter, Cookus, and Tuamu. And then I think I would have Shea Patterson in a GPP run. We saw what he could do last week. He's shown the ability to be mobile before. I would be a little bit concerned about Love getting the snaps and sort of him not really getting the full load. And then the other person I would use would be Deandre Johnson. I think I've been higher on him week in, week out than you. I see the potential to have big rushing games. We've seen him have 90-plus yards rushing twice out of 4 weeks. And we saw him have the best snap count he's had. But every week he's between 10 to 12 carries. and he's between like 6 to 10 pass attempts. So I think that Deandre Johnson is still really usable. The issue is if they clog the rushing lanes for him, he's really not going to produce. Like last week, you saw him get 11 carries for 14 yards, which therefore meant all of his production was really through the air, which was 98 yards and a touchdown. So he still had like 9 points, but I do think the upside's there. The upside's there for him to get 102 on the ground, which you can't speak about anyone else. And like you look at these projections and you see 14.49 for Slaughter's the high point. Well, if he gets 102 on the ground, that well exceeds the 14.49 that we're looking at with Slaughter. So those are the 5 I'd probably use. For those that are not familiar with Vad Lee, so Vad Lee ran the triple option at Georgia Tech. He's going to be a very mobile quarterback that has a really good rushing ability. So I think that there's a really high chance that he at least gets some snaps to come in and run the ball. So I definitely think that Vad Lee will probably get some snaps. So that would make me a little bit concerned there. So moving to running back, you talked about it already. In my opinion, Jordan Ellis is the clear top running back in the league. The snaps are just there for him. The carries are just there for him. No one's really touching him. Like the last 2 weeks, we've seen him have some pretty relatively big games. The thing that I really liked.
Yeah, and Logan got released mid last week.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything in general is pretty great. And like the biggest influx for Ellis is like what you're talking about. He had 7 targets last week. You have a guy getting 20 carries and 4 to 6 targets. That's huge. That's definitely RB1. So like to me, Ellis is definitely RB1 in the league. I think there's other guys that make some sense. Like we look down at Paul Terry, who I talked up quite a bit last week. He was, again, relatively productive. Didn't quite have the same game that he had the week before, but he still ended up with like 9 points with a pretty solid rushing floor and a pretty solid target floor. So I think Terry's a guy that makes sense. But I think for me, Ellis has established himself as the clear RB1 in the league. And we have Maribel projected higher. Why don't you talk a little bit about Maribel as well?
Yeah, so we're getting a bit of defensive data to be able to work into our projections as well. So that's really driving the Maribel Ellis projections. So Ellis is going against New Jersey, who has the best rush defense in the league so far. They're allowing like 67 yards per game on the ground. They've just been shutting down the run and allowing a lot through the pass. So they could be they could be kind of establishing their defense as a kind of a pass funnel. So that's the first knock to Ellis is just it's not a great matchup from the data that we have so far. And on the flip side, CJ Maribel is going against Philadelphia, who have been getting absolutely gashed on the ground. They've allowed over 200 rushing yards per game so far in the season. And like I mentioned, New Jersey at 67. So there's a huge delta there. Maribel is also increasing his snap share as the season's gone along. I will say the one point of concern with him is that Birmingham's brought in Bo Scarborough in place for Jordan Chun. So if Bo just comes in and takes that like 10% snap role, I don't think it'll affect Maribel too much, but it is concerning if Birmingham's going to have 3 active running backs. But that the matchup is really driving a lot of the projection there. So I do think Maribel is the top running back on the slate at this point in terms of the news we have now. And I think Jordan Ellis, if he is going to be owned in this 40% range, is a pretty elite tournament fade. I feel great about his volume, but I think there's a good chance it could be empty volume like we saw in some of his games so far. So it might be tough to avoid Ellis in cash games given his role. But if he's going to be this highly owned, I will be looking to try to come under or even consider completely fading him in tournaments. What do you think there?
I think I would probably still want to be of weight or overweight on Ellis. And the reason for that is I just think there's so much uncertainty along so many of the teams that his volume and his actual offense, like his workload is increased actually with the increase of pass game usage from him. So to me, Ellis is the clear RB1 in the league. And I don't think it's really close. Like he's had 18 plus carries every single week. No one else has come close to like that type of volume. So for me, it's still Ellis or bust. I actually am a bit more concerned with Maribel than you are. I'm concerned that Scarborough comes in and sort of ends up eating into some of Maribel's share. The only concern or the only way that like my concern would sort of be like put off there and I wouldn't have much is if Tony Brooks-James becomes inactive. I could see them in a situation where like they bring in Scarborough and they run Maribel and they just sort of run Scarborough as the backup and replacing Tony Brooks-James. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, if I was them, that's what I would do. Tony Brooks-James has not been good. And the projections right now are just kind of accounting for the 50-50 possibility that Scarborough is active. So if he is not on the inactive list, you will see Maribel go down and Scarborough go up, because I do think he would garner more of a workload than someone like Jordan Chun did last week, who is coming off of an injury. So if they do have 3 active running backs, you'll probably see Maribel get pushed down below Jordan Ellis.
For
sure. I mean, as of now, we don't have any of the injury reports for any of the teams this week. So we'll certainly be updating over the next 2 games before the slate kicks off on Friday.
Yeah, but definitely what we saw last week too is like you might not get stuff till super late. You might not get it at all. So you definitely have to be aware of that. The one spot that I really dislike, and I think you'll agree, is Michigan. They're running the 3 guys. Nobody's sort of separating in terms of a volume standpoint. And it's really worrisome to me from their perspective of that's like your 1 3-headed monster that's like for sure there in the league. And it's very much a very murky situation where there's not much clarity in that. Do you agree with that on the Michigan side?
Yeah, it seems like that's almost like a near like 1/3 split for all of them. And then you've seen some big plays from Corbin. So I actually think Corbin's going to come in over-owned. Like, I think 15% Corbin, to me, and given his role, is over-owned, and you cannot rely on that big play each week. So if he's someone that people are going to be playing, I'll gladly just fully fade that backfield.
Yeah, and then the one person that I think is of interest that is and you'll see here is very high in the list despite having 1 point last week. It's Mark Thompson. Why don't you talk a little about Mark Thompson and the workload that he's looking at in Houston?
Yeah, the problem with him is that he just doesn't have a great pass game role. So if he's not like generating, if they're having trouble moving the ball on the ground, like there's just not much there. He still maintained a pretty healthy share. They just they didn't move the ball enough, and he was quite unproductive. That shows the risk of having a running back who doesn't catch passes. So that's where someone like Paul Terry, even though he's much cheaper, has a lower projection. I think his floor is better, especially if Philly only has 2 active running backs.
Yeah, for sure. So that's sort of the breakdown at running back. So let's move on to receiver. We saw an absolute target monster game by Trey Walker last week. He had 17 targets in that game, which is incredible. To me, Victor Bolden is very clearly the best wide receiver target from a cash game perspective. And as you see here, they really got the pricing correct with Trey Walker at 4K. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'll start off with the Trey.
We talk about pick'em sort of situations. You got a guy that got 17 targets last week at 4K. So I'll let you talk about that a little bit, Alex.
Yeah, we'll start off with the Trey Walker. I'll say there's a good chance his projection comes down during the week. Right now, we're assuming Bailey Gaither and Jeff Thomas both being out again. However, I think there's a good chance that at least one of them comes back, especially given that they released one of their wide receivers earlier this week. So I would expect that Walker share to come down. Like last week, he owed like over a 50% target share. We don't have that projected, but we have low 30% right now with all those injuries. But I think that'll probably come down into like the low 20s if someone like a Bailey Gaither is active. So I expect Bolden probably to be the highest projected running back wide receiver once the slate locks. So like to your point, he's the most stable in terms of targets week to week. Walker's going to have some more volatility, especially if those other receivers are back. I will say, however, that Houston's allowing a ton through the air. And they're pretty heavy favorites. So it could be a situation where Pittsburgh is forced into passing the ball a lot, which is definitely beneficial to like a Trey Walker or Bailey Gaither. And if we get news on Gaither pretty late in the week, he's somebody I'm really interested in tournaments, because we saw him go off and then kind of burn everybody when he was a surprise inactive. But if he's back ready to go in this matchup, I like Gaither a lot as well.
Yeah, so I will say I do agree Bolden will be very high owned, but people are going to play Trey Walker. Trey Walker is going to be absolutely piled on. I actually think that our first run at projected ownership. Both these guys are probably low. I think Trey Walker is going to be 50 to 60% owned and stuff. I honestly think that if you're running GPPs, like going underweight on Walker makes a lot of sense. And I really like the Gaither play if he ends up being healthy and active, because I think he has a great chance. Other things we saw last week is we saw Jonathan Adams have a really big game. He was someone we talked up. I think he was like both of our favorite value play last week, and he ended up having 25 points. So hopefully some of you guys were able to take advantage of that. And
his snap share has been going up as well. And you see someone like a Johnny Dixon snap share go down. And I think Adams is kind of establishing himself as the alpha wide receiver there. Like he was the only one over 90% snap share, I believe. And Dixon was down in the mid 70s, which for someone like him, you want to see that higher. So Dixon was someone who was a cash staple last week. And if this is going to be more a role where he rotates more going forward, he'll probably come in over own, at least for this week and maybe next.
Yeah, another person that I really like that I think is one of the better GPP plays is Isaiah Zuber. If you look, he's 9,800, so he's very expensive, which might make people shy away. However, we've already established it's a total pick 'em. You can do effectively whatever you want. He's a guy that's going to be a downfield threat. He's actually had 10 plus points in every single game this far through the 4 weeks we've seen. I think he's a really, really strong play as well. Is there any other guys that stand out to you at receiver that look good that maybe we have a little bit lower on the list?
Yeah, so same team as Zuber, JoJo Ward. Ward had been inactive, and a few minutes before the game, they tweeted out their inactive list, and he wasn't on it. So we didn't know if he was going to start, if he was going to play. He ended up playing every single offensive snap. So Ward is someone I think you can go back to, especially in tournaments. We saw in like week 1, he had an astronomical target share. It wasn't as demanding, didn't earn as many targets last week, but certainly possible that he kind of bounces back to that role. It's tough to play Zuber and Ward and like double stack Thorson just because he's so bad, but I guess I could see it. But I do like Ward a bit. The Philly receivers are tough to peg because they're running like 4 guys as primary and then rotating a bit with someone like Roland and Maurice Alexander, who both have had massive games, and they're kind of reduced to like a 15% snap share role. So that's kind of interesting because I thought those guys would play more given they each had like kind of an explosion week, but it seems like they want to run like the Jordan Sewell, Devin Gray types out there. So I think you could certainly double stack and mix and match on that team just because there's going to be so much volume in terms of receptions for this PPR format. It's quite beneficial.
For sure. One person I noticed that played a lot, and we'll see what you think on this, is our former boy, Sage Surratt. He ended up playing a lot of snaps last week. Was very unproductive with his snaps that he played. But this is a guy that we saw absolutely tear things up in college. He's probably one of the people that should never have left early that did. He never really got a chance anywhere. And this was a guy that absolutely went nuclear in college and looked really good doing it. So what's your thoughts on Surratt coming in at 2,700 with the amount of snaps that he played last week? The targets weren't fully there, but this is a guy who we've seen destroy before.
Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in him if Carrie Angeline is inactive again. If Angeline's back, I wouldn't play Surratt based on what we've seen the first few weeks. So I'm not sure what the issue with Angeline is, but we'll probably get that later in the week. But I don't think many people will click him just because like you don't need that savings. But what it allows you to do is like if you're moving from say a Trey Walker, instead of playing Trey Walker in a lineup, you play Sage Surratt, and then you can literally play the highest projected plays in every other position. And you'll have kind of a unique approach and still playing all the best plays. There's just a lot of things you can do with a guy at that salary point.
Yeah, and I will say, so from a GPP perspective, this is something that I think is very evident and something you should consider when looking at Trey Walker. If you play Trey Walker, you can do whatever you want from a salary perspective. I think the best way to play Trey Walker is also play another cheap receiver, because most likely people that are playing Trey Walker are playing guys like Victor Bolden. So I would probably even eliminate, like I would probably make my run if I did an MME run this weekend. I'd probably make it one of Walker, Bolden, Max, because I think that that's what a lot of people are going to do. But I think you will really differentiate if you play Trey Walker. And I'm not even saying play like Sage Surratt. Like you could play like JoJo Ward or Sal Cannella or Marlon Williams, like guys like that. If you play another cheap receiver and just sort of leave a lot on the table, I think that can be your differentials if you're playing Trey Walker, which a lot of people will do. Do you agree with that thought?
Yeah, certainly. And someone you touched on before was Zuber. Well, Zuber is playing against Trey Walker, so you can get a little mini correlation there. Him and you play Zuber and Walker instead of Bolden. You're getting different, and then you're correlating the wide receivers a bit in a game that could see a lot of passing yards.
Definitely. All right, moving on to the defensive side of things. I'm going to keep it pretty simple for my thoughts. Just sprinkle out the defenders. In cash games, you are going to want the Stallions defense. Philly is a team that's going to pass and most likely have some errors that will lead to some production on the defense. So like in cash games, I think you're definitely looking at the Stallions defense. And then GPPs, I'm thinking sprinkle. Anything you would add to sort of that breakdown?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty clearly going to be Stallions and Gamblers as the top two defenses. I would say my favorite defense for tournaments would be the Generals at 4,800, just because they're overpriced. And they play a team. If they shut down Jordan Ellis a bit and forcing them to pass more, that could be a beneficial situation. I just think the fact that they're overpriced will lead to lower ownership. But yeah, definitely sprinkle around and don't play like 30% of the top two defenses.
Yeah, I think there's merit to even just removing them too. Like in GPPs, I think there's merit in just not having any Stallions or Gamblers and hoping that somebody ends up being the top defense outside of that.
Yeah, certainly. It's a quick and dirty way to get different.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's no reason to play defenses into this massive ownership.
For sure. All right, everyone. That's going to wrap it up for our individual breakdowns of the week. Like I said, make sure you guys are checking in with news. News affects this league dramatically, especially with the lack of players on each roster. So one piece of news can drastically adjust what you want to do for the week. Anything else that you think we have missed during our coverage here today, Alex?
No, we'll be monitoring the news. I think after Friday morning, we'll do a projections update and rerun projected ownership. So we'll have that good to go for the Friday kickoff. So we get a 3-day long slate this week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we'll be ready. Thanks for hanging out.
There you go. All right, everyone. That's going to wrap it up for us this week. Good luck to all of you this weekend. We hope that someone takes down the big GPP. For Alex, I'm Sean. Good luck. We'll see you guys next week.